Alright, so we are doing exercise 9C and we're looking at question 2. Question 2 is telling us that a fair coin is tossed twice. Find the probability that the first toss is a head. So we're going to begin this question by systematically representing our sample space with a tree diagram. So my first toss, I can either get a head or a tail. This will be my first toss. So immediately we could just stop here for a second and ask ourselves the question, well, there are two options for my first toss. One is a head and one is a tail. So therefore, the probability that the first toss is going to be a head is going to be 1/2. So I could stop here if I wanted to and get my answer. But let's continue and see what happens. So then we could continue to draw out my tree diagram. So from here I could get a head or a tail, or from here I could get a head or a tail. And this column would represent my second toss. I then could write out the elements of my sample space. So I could either get two heads, so a head and a head. I could get a head and a tail, a head and a tail. I could get a tail and a head, a tail and a head. Or I could get a tail and a tail, a tail and a tail. Now that I've listed out all the elements of my sample space, I'm trying to find where my first toss is going to be a head. So as you can see here, my first toss is a head. Here again, my first toss is a head. Here, my first toss is a tail, so I'm not going to include that. And here, my first toss is a tail, so I'm not going to include that. So what I could say is that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 possible outcomes, and 2 of these are going to satisfy what I'm after. So 2 out of 4 are what I'm after, and 2 out of 4 is the same as 1/2. So as you can see, I've shown you 2 ways you could approach this problem. Let's now go on to B, and I've already drawn out my sample space through a tree diagram. And now we're trying to find when the second toss is a head, when the second toss is a head. So I would begin by going, all right, this is my first toss, this is my second toss, I've got a head here. I don't have a head here as my second toss. I do have a head here as my second toss. I don't have a head here as my second toss. I then am going to figure out, all right, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 possible outcomes, and 2 of these outcomes, this one and this one, are going to give me what I want, that being the second toss being a head. So I have 2 out of 4 giving me what I want, so that's the same as 1/2. Let's now move on to the third part of the question, part C, which is asking me to figure out the probability that both tosses are heads. Both tosses are heads. So the way I'm going to do this is simply looking at all the elements of my sample space, and I can see here both tosses are heads. Here they're not, here they're not, here they're not. So again, I'm going to go, all right, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 possible outcomes, and only one of these outcomes is going to give me what I want. So that's going to be a 1 in 4 chance, or a probability of 1 in 4. Hopefully this was helpful to you, and I'll see you in the next question.